Okay, welcome back to our introductory videos. Here, the second one, I want to cover the three kinds of rhetoric. There are three main categories or types of rhetoric, of discourse, according to Aristotle, and we will be focusing on one, but we want to cover a couple of the others a little bit briefly here, just so you know what they are. You'll probably recognize them, you'll remember them. There's nothing wholly new right here, maybe just some of the terms and the way people have described and used these kinds of discourse may be a little bit new to you, but this video will not be so wholly different from anything else you've heard about that it will seem completely strange. So there are, as we said, there are three kinds of discourse. And remember, the goal isn't exactly persuasion, but it's certainly connected. We want to make sure that we have done our part. Remember our definition of rhetoric, finding the available means of persuasion. We want to make sure that we have done our part in gathering the kinds of evidence and communicating that in such a way that it really meets the situation. You know, one of the things we'll be talking about throughout this term, one of our golden rules, is know your audience. Know the kinds of people you're speaking to, what is their perspective on the issue, what is the sort of the climate of the room, you know, what is their emotional connection to this issue. And so you want to know all that going into the kinds of things you say, how you say them, and why you say them, all related to each other to try to persuade your audience. But I know it may sound like a lot, but as we go step by step, it'll all become really clear as we go. But as you said, three kinds of discourse: deliberative, forensic, epideictic. And pretty much every kind of speech, every situation in which you find yourself communicating, talking to other people, is going to fall into one of these three categories. All right, deliberative, oratory, the kinds of discussions about what should we do, deliberate about public affairs. Should we go to war? Should we raise taxes? Should we, build this building in this neighborhood? So there's certainly a lot of political situations in which deliberative oratory is used. Should we align with them? So sometimes, because politics and the way that nations and governments work is so tied up to deliberative oratory, it's sometimes mainly just called political or advisory oratory, or hortative, like to exhort. Hortative is just to urge you on, like I exhort you, as Romans 12 says, I exhort you, brothers, or I urge you, brothers, in light of God's mercy. That is Paul using deliberative oratory. This is what we should all do as a group. Okay, it's the most common kind of persuasive use of language in which you try to persuade people. So as you can probably figure out, this is the kind of oratory that we will be focusing on here this semester or next semester in senior thesis. You are going to try to tell people, this is the situation, this is what we should do about it, this is what I think you should do, here's why you should believe what I believe, and then more likely than not, give them practical things on what they should do about it. So you're going to deliberate with them, we should do something, I should advise you on change how you behave, change how you think about this. Maybe you want to dissuade them against something, but let me just give you a tip in advance here. It'll be a lot easier for you, especially writing your thesis second semester, to try to prove a positive or urge your audience to do something rather than to disprove a negative or urge them to not do something, urge them against something. It'll be a lot easier to try to frame your argument in a positive sort of way, encouraging your audience, this is how you should do it, this is what you should believe, instead of saying, don't do this, don't believe this. It'll be probably more beneficial for you emotionally to think about things in positive ways more often than the negative. It might be more enjoyable to research and write about it if you were trying to prove some sort of positive, active sort of involvement type issue. I'm not saying you can't disprove a negative, or we shouldn't do this. It's just much easier to focus on do this, think about this positive way. I want to urge you to do this instead of don't do this. It'll be a lot easier to do that. But if you are up for the challenge and you want to, if the nature of the issue is such that it's got to be don't do this negative thing, we can certainly go for that if that's what you want to do. All right, so deliberative oratory is the thing that we're going to be used. using throughout this term, right? And so the role of the listener, the judge, is to think about the future. All right, here's how the situation, here's what we should do, here's what it will look like in the future. What we will do or should do, maybe we won't do, depending on your perspective. All right, we will cover the special topics in a couple of weeks, and another slideshow, another handouts. But just so you know, the topics, the areas in which those arguments exist are the realms of expediency. What is expedient? What is inexpedient? What is good, beneficial for the community? What is not good, not beneficial, or maybe detrimental to the community, to the country, maybe just to us as a class, depending on how large of a group you're trying to persuade. You're talking about in terms of what is good or what is negative for us as a group now and in the future as we change what we believe and what we say. The means of persuasion, as we said, you're going to exhort them or dehort them, depending on if you want to encourage them to do this instead, or dehort them, don't do this instead. All right, so those are as we said, the means of persuasion. You're going to exhort your audience to do something or dehort them if you're up for a challenge. All right, two of the other kinds of oratory, the second most common one is forensic. If you are a big fan of courtroom dramas or Law and Order type shows or NCIS type shows where they go in and find the evidence and do sort of legal procedure type things, this is the kind of oratory that is used in the courtroom. So if you are interested in that, or not just those shows, but if you're thinking about the legal profession, this might be the kind of oratory that you will use quite a bit in your future occupation. So sometimes called legal oratory, judicial oratory. It's what lawyers use in the courtroom, or when you're trying to defend or condemn someone's actions. You might need this in your RA, if those of you are going to be RAs, if you're dealing with problems in your college dorms, you might want to praise people or say this is what we should not be doing. You might be using forensic oratory. You're going to be talking about the issues of the topics of justice or injustice. Most likely, as he says, the role of the listener is to judge about the past. This is what happened. Here's how we should think about what we're saying has happened. Here's how we should respond to events that have already occurred. Okay? So different from deliberative, and that deliberative is about the future. What should we do? Forensic is how should we view and think about what has happened in the past? What is the just way to deal with it? Or talking about injustice has occurred. Here's how we should respond to what has already occurred. So there's the topics and the means of persuasion, accusation, or defense. If you are defending someone who has been unjustly accused of some sort of improper behavior or whatever it might be, or maybe you're being accused of things that have happened in the past and that doesn't relate to who you are right now or the situation right now, you might use the means of defense to say that may have been true in the past, but right now the situation is different. The people are different. The attitudes, the emotions involved are changed. It's time to think about the past in a different way. It's not how it used to be in certain situations. So dealing with the past is not just the past without being concerned in the present. It could be both. So, forensic oratory, very important kinds of speech as well. And lastly, epideictic. You are probably not familiar with that term, but it's probably the least used kind of speech, except for holidays and things like, a going away party or a toast at a wedding or something like that. It's sort of a formal use of language, really, usually for just special occasions, also known, as you can see, demonstrative, panegyrical, ceremonial language is probably how it is. For special occasions, you're not really persuading people. You're just sort of pleasing your audience, maybe inspiring them. Maybe, we'll be doing an exercise in a few weeks about, the kind, rousing the audience's emotions, and this might be the kind of thing you want to do. In the world of sports, this is probably used a little bit when you're trying to appeal to their emotions, and you want to maybe psych up the team for a key play, a key inning, or in baseball, or last few seconds on the clock, or whatever it might be. You might use some declamatory oratory to try to get people to respond emotionally and immediately, but it's more often in a sort of formal, almost relaxed kind of ceremony sort of situation. The Gettysburg Address is a good example of, as we looked at last year, kind of, here's how we should look at the past, yes, so it's a little bit of, forensic, but it's mostly not legal or justice or injustice. It's just a ceremonial. Here's why we are gathered together to honor this event, to honor the memory. Preaching sometimes falls in this category when it's talking about, sort of emotional responses to the past or the future. It's sort of getting people together to feel a certain way, to react a certain way. 4th of July speeches, like I said, toasts at weddings, things like that. Graduation speeches that a couple of you will be writing in a few months. And those are the kinds of epidictic oratory. So they certainly have a time and a place, but pretty infrequent, just special events, really. And so the listener, the reader's job is to critique like some historical event. You're being cast back and to think about some event, maybe in the past or maybe in the future. As like you said, graduation speeches sometimes cause us to think about what are we going to be like, where are we going to be 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and the audience is supposed to sort of imagine that situation and not necessarily judge it, but sort of put themselves in that position. What will the culture be like? What will we be like? Topics of honoring and dishonoring, if it's negative, for example, like a general on the battlefield who has just conquered his enemy, you want to dishonor their memory, perhaps, depending, certainly in the classical world more so than more recently. But so honoring the past, honoring people, like I said, toasts at weddings and graduation speeches, great deal of honoring people who have achieved something or about to embark on something really special and exciting. So the means are more often, praise the situation, praise the people, maybe blame, again, if it's a negative situation, but that's epidictic oratory. So there's the three kinds of oratory for you. Deliberative, forensic, epidictic. Like we said, we'll be using deliberative most often, but it's important, I think, to know the other two kinds of categories and the kinds of topics, the means that you use to persuade your audience as the situations arise.